Marvin Hier, founder of the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles, an institution that fights anti-Semitism and other prejudice. He also performed a prayer at President Trump's inauguration. Rabbi, thanks for spending time with us. Do you think the pressure being put on Mnuchin and other Jewish members of Trump's staff is fair?
Well, I don't know about that, but I know what my opinion is very, very clearly. I do not think the president did the right thing. The president, first of all, in his first statement, should not have mentioned the stock market and jobs when you're facing the greatest tragedy that we have, Nazi and the Klan marching in the heartland of America 75 years after the Holocaust. And so I think he should never have equated that with other demonstrators. That was a very big mistake, and I think he knows it.
What would you do if you were a member of his staff right now, if you were Steve Mnuchin or Gary Cohn or somebody else?
Well, I don't know the circumstance. I would criticize. I think that if they should speak their conscience. In other words, it wasn't handled right. I don't think anybody will argue that when the president of the United States comes out, and this is the first time that he's speaking about it, and he begins his conversation by telling us about jobs, and then addresses this, and then makes the comparison that the demonstrators on the other side, they were both wrong. That is quite preposterous.
I want to get your reaction to this exchange the president had with CNN's Jim Acosta. Let's watch.
You don't have any doubt about it.
But, Mr. President,
and if you reported it accurately,
but the neo-Nazis started it, sir. The neo-Nazis started this. They showed up in Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville to protest the removal of that statue.
And you had some very bad people in that group. You also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people.
No, sir. The Nazis. There are no fine people in the Nazis. There are no fine people in the Nazis.
So, Rabbi, as you watch or hear those comments, what's going through your mind?
Well, what's going through my mind is that human beings, all human beings, are fallible. You know, Ronald Reagan went to Bitburg. We criticized him for that. Bitburg was a cemetery where the SS are buried. President Trump should not have handled this the way he did. He should have been unequivocal. He made a mistake, and let's hope he learned from it.
What would learning from it look like?
Never repeating that again. If I were giving him advice, I would apologize for that and go forward. Look, we have a lot of issues in the world, and we don't want America, 75 years after 400,000 GIs gave their lives to liberate Europe from Nazism, to have to replay the Klan and Nazism in the heartland of America.
Well, I know what he's planning to do going forward at this point. He's planning to have a campaign-style rally in Arizona this week. And again, here was the scene last summer when then candidate Trump was greeted by protesters and his giant inflatable mock-up of him wearing a KKK robe. I was on the ground reporting during this time, and I was talking with some of those protesters who represent immigrants' rights groups. Obviously, immigration and race issues are hot issues in this part of our country as well. This time around, the Phoenix mayor is now expressing concern that if the president comes there after Charlottesville, it could spark something that could become violent. If the president goes forward with this, what message does that send?
Well, let me say this. If the president would ask me what should he do in Phoenix, I would tell him, condemn the Nazis and the Klan and never mention the other demonstrators. Make it unequivocal while the whole country is watching. They are not the same.
Rabbi Marvin Hier, thank you for your remarks. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up tomorrow, millions of Americans will be able to see the first total solar. Hello, you are in the CNN Newsroom. Thank you for joining me. I'm Ana Cabrera in New York, and we begin with a major announcement from the White House. Tomorrow night at 9, President Trump will address the nation and the troops to reveal a new strategy in Afghanistan. Now, this major address comes as brand new polling reveals the president is underwater in some key states that propelled him to the White House. In Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, take a look. His approval rating doesn't even top 36%. This is according to a new survey taken after Charlottesville and the violence there. Hoping to boost support, the president is holding a campaign-style rally in Phoenix, Arizona this Tuesday, even though local officials are warning against it. The city's mayor has asked the president to cancel this event out of fear it could lead to violence. And at least one lawmaker agrees. Congressman Ruben Gallego of Arizona tells the Washington Post, quote, "I absolutely think it's inappropriate to be holding a political rally a few days after an innocent woman was mowed down by a neo-Nazi, throwing tinder onto an ongoing fire." CNN's Boris Sanchez is in Bridgewater, New Jersey, near the Trump Golf Resort, where the president is spending the weekend. And Boris, let's start with this big address tomorrow night. What can you tell us about the deliberations leading up to this big decision on Afghanistan?
Yeah, Anna, this is actually something that the president tweeted about yesterday. He was alluding to some important decisions that were made in a meeting with top military brass at Camp David on Friday, and he included in that tweet that a decision had been made on Afghanistan. This is something that the White House had been working on for several months. Very different options on the table here. Everything from a surge in troops, something that Senator John McCain of Arizona supported, to a complete withdrawal, or even potentially, as former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon argued for, a shifting of responsibilities to private companies, mercenaries, so to speak. Beyond all of that, Secretary of Defense James Mattis was asked earlier today what the decision ultimately was on Afghanistan. He decided not to step on the president's toes and let him explain the decision for himself. Here's more from Secretary Mattis. It looks like we don't have that sound, Anna, but he essentially said that he wanted the president to explain the decision himself. Interestingly, he also noted that this wasn't just a strategy on Afghanistan, but this was a full South Asia strategy. To put this decision into context, Anna, this is the longest war in American history, dating back to fall of 2001. You'll recall that in 2014, President Obama declared an end to all combat operations there. Fast forward to February of this year, when the commander of troops in Afghanistan, General James Nicholson, said that the United States and Afghan troops had essentially reached a stalemate with the Taliban. So it'll be interesting to see how President Trump now moves forward from this, again, the longest war in American history.
Sadly, we continue to lose American lives there just this week, in fact. Boris, I want to turn and ask you about Phoenix and this upcoming rally. Is there any sign the White House may be heeding some of these warnings from the officials there?
No sign yet on a lot of this criticism against the president follows last Tuesday's off-the-rails press conference. The president received a lot of harsh criticism for, you mentioned the mayor of Phoenix asking the president to delay this event, others not going quite as far, but asking the president to have a more inclusive tone in his message, including Ohio governor and former presidential candidate John Kasich. He was on State of the Union with Jake Tapper earlier today. Here's what he said.
You're going to go to Phoenix and make a speech? Fine. That's your right. You can go there. He's got free speech just like the rest of us have it. But when you go, try to use that as an opportunity to say something to bring people together. You might recall when he delivered that speech to the Congress, the day after, the people on CNN said, well, tonight Donald Trump became president. He has it within him. If he can maintain discipline, he has it within him, I think, to overcome this and move forward.
So all eyes will be on the president, not only tomorrow night at 9 when he delivers that address detailing the plan forward for Afghanistan, but also on Tuesday night when he holds a rally in Phoenix. Anna.
All right, Boris Sanchez in Bridgewater, New Jersey for us. Thank you. Now, I was actually in Phoenix a little over a year ago, last June, here reporting for CNN, when then candidate Trump held a rally there. And I want to show you one of the reasons officials might be concerned about emotions boiling over. This was what Trump, the candidate, arrived to last year. A giant inflatable likeness of him wearing a KKK robe. Again, this was last year. His visit Tuesday comes exactly 1 week after he doubled down on that initial Charlottesville comment, drawing a moral equivalency between white supremacists and counter-protesters. With us to discuss, White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Sarah Westwood, CNN political commentator and Democratic strategist Maria Cardona, and CNN political commentator and KABC talk radio host John Phillips. Sarah, what is the political calculation to go forward with this rally despite the safety concerns?
Well, for President Trump, rallies have typically been a way for him to gain control of his message at times when it feels like it's starting to spin out of control. Now is certainly one of those times. President Trump has the opportunity to trumpet his accomplishments. He often feels like the media unfairly doesn't cover what his administration has been able to achieve. And in the case of this potential Sheriff Joe Arpaio pardon, the White House may be taking a calculated risk that whatever blowback it gets from pardoning Sheriff Joe Arpaio, that can't possibly be as bad as the backlash over Charlottesville. So that might explain at least the timing of the Arpaio pardon. It doesn't necessarily have to be now. The sheriff hasn't even been sentenced yet. So all of this may be a calculated risk from the White House to get out of the hole that they dug with Charlottesville and try to move on to something else.
Of course, that pardoning has been thrown out there. That's not confirmed at this point. The White House hasn't said that's going to happen for sure, although there is some indication that may be part of this rally. John, take a look at the new NBC Mars poll. This was taken after Charlottesville, and it finds that the majority of voters in 3 key states the president won simply don't approve of the job he's doing. I want to play for you what Republican Senator Tim Scott said President Trump needs to do next.
We need our president to sit down with folks who have a personal experience, a deep connection to the horror and the pain of this country's provocative racial history. If the president wants to have a better understanding and appreciation for what he should do next, he needs to hear something from folks who have gone through this painful history. Without that personal connection to the painful past, it will be hard for him to regain that moral authority from my perspective.
So, John, is a large impersonal campaign-style rally with his base really what the president needs to do next? Why not go visit one-on-one with the Americans who aren't his base but are still part of the fabric of this country that he now represents?
I think going to Arizona is a great idea for the president. As those polls indicate that you just referenced, he's had a rough week, and he goes into these campaign rallies and just lights up the room like a Christmas tree. And there's one thing that we learned from the President Obama administration, and particularly with the battle over health care, where he passed health care with nothing but Democratic votes, 0 Republican votes. And that is this: the political calculation of success in a deeply divided America is to make sure that your team sticks with you. And the fact that he's underwater now in states that he won in the November election means he needs to pull the base back together. And the Trump base loves Sheriff Joe Arpaio. So to go to Arizona and to give him a pardon and to have a fantastic rally that's carried on television, I think would be a great shot in the arm for President Trump.
And yet, John, is that going to unite the people in this country who are hurting?
Well, it's going to unite his base. And if those poll numbers are accurate, that means that he's losing some people who voted for him in the November election. He needs to pull those people back in, and this rally will help him do that.
Maria, do you agree?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I do agree that it will ignite his base, and that is certainly what he desperately needs. But I think that it is it's a calculated risk to go there, but I think it's stupidity on his part right now. But here's the problem, Anna. He doesn't care. I agree with Governor Kasich, and I agree with Senator Scott that it would be smart for this president to try to seek beyond his base and unite Americans, unite all of those communities who have been fearful from the day that he stepped into the Oval Office, and with good reason. African Americans, Muslims, Latinos, the LGBT community. But guess what? This president doesn't care about them. He has been very clear, even from the campaign, that he does not care about communities of color. He does not care about the people who do not go to his rally. That is why he is going to Phoenix, because it is like a security blanket for him. He is underwater right now, not just nationally, but in the 3 Midwestern states that actually gave him the presidency. He is at record low approval ratings. the generic congressional ballot, Democrats are leading by 10 points nationally and more in these 3 Midwestern states. He knows that. He is in trouble. This is a president in crisis. He lacks moral leadership. He has demonstrated moral decay. He's doing nothing to convince that the majority of Americans who did not want him to be in the White House, that he still wants to be their president, as well as those who come to his rallies.
Sarah, why do you think he is losing support among those states and the voters in the states that voted for him in the Rust Belt?
I think when you look into the frustrations that members of his base who have spoken to the media have expressed, it usually does not have to do with his inflammatory tweets. It doesn't have to do with whatever controversy is preoccupying Washington. But people are frustrated that Trump's agenda is not getting done. He's not making any progress on the border wall. Obviously, the attempt to repeal Obamacare failed spectacularly. They're not making progress on the travel ban, which got tied up in the courts. Everything that President Trump promised has been stopped by his own party, by Democrats, by his own inability to focus on his message. And because of that, he has slowly, steadily lost support among his base. You haven't seen as many sharp drops when these controversies pop up, but you have seen it decline gradually as voters, his own voters, become convinced that maybe the Republican agenda is not going to get done as quickly as he promised them.
Sarah Westwood, Maria Cardona, and John Phillips, our thanks to all of you. We appreciate it this weekend. Coming up, more fiery rhetoric from North Korea aimed directly at the U.S. We'll tell you what the regime is.
Last weekend caused racial, religious, and cultural tensions to flare, creating really an explosive climate throughout the country, one that still lingers. President Trump received a wave of backlash after delivering mixed messages on who was to blame for the violence.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, would say.
Kill the person. Heather hired
Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville
Excuse me.
to protest.
Excuse me. They didn't put themselves down as you, and you had some very bad people in that group. You also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
With me now are 3 religious leaders, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, Imam Dai Abdullah, and Reverend Suzanne Johnson Cook. I want to thank all of you for coming. I feel like we need voices from across the spectrum. There's a big appetite for voices from across the spectrum, just looking for a positive message here, a way forward. I'm just curious, after these events of the past week, which frankly still linger, I'm curious, what are the messages each of you is delivering to your congregations in terms of finding a way forward? Rabbi, if we could begin with you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just returned yesterday from Charlottesville, where I had the opportunity to be with our congregation in Charlottesville over the Sabbath. And to tell you that they're traumatized is to say the obvious. But they're very clear that what happened last weekend was, in a sense, a moral eclipse. When the President of the United States was unable to distinguish between right and wrong, between love and hate, between racism and unity. And what is distressing is that if you can't have that moral clarity, you can't actually discern the very complicated issues. So the message that I was able to share this Friday night to this community, one of the oldest synagogues in Virginia, was that actually people of faith know what it means to have a view, a moral view of the universe. And we're not confused between racism and love. And the religious leadership of that community stood together with love and clarity and light in the midst of that moral eclipse, and was able to convey what actually is the way forward. We have to be clear that demonic hate expressed by KKK and neo-Nazis, they marched right around the synagogue during their Sabbath prayers last week. They were chanting anti-Semitic slogans. Those are sounds and sights that will not fade quickly from their sights, but also from all of ours. So we are called for moral discernment, and we must discern, and then we must stand together and understand that white supremacy isn't just a horrific rally in Charlottesville. It's embedded in the very policies of much of our government. You think about voter suppression, it is a form of white supremacy. So we've got real work to do, and people of faith don't need to only pray, not to only study biblical texts, but we need to actually raise our voices with love and clarity. And we hope the President of the United States will be able to be the moral leader. Abraham Lincoln, in his first inaugural address, called upon America to be in touch with the better angels of their nature. That's what a president is supposed to say. That's what he's supposed to call out in all of us, to bring those better angels so that we could be the country that we are meant to be.
Reverend Cook, if I could ask you, it was striking to many today that Senator Tim Scott, the only African-American Republican senator today, questioned the president's moral authority in his words. And I wonder if you share that concern.
I share very much. He's not alone in those thoughts whatsoever. You know, when you look at the civil rights movement, it was born in the Black church. And so as an African American, we've been insulted. He says there were bad people on both sides. We say there's bad leadership at this time. But you asked us what we're preaching. I'm in Chautauqua Institute, upstate New York, an ecumenical gathering of people from every denomination, Jewish, Christians, across the board. And I talked today as a Black Baptist about Jewish women who took a stand for what was rightfully theirs. And, you know, they were peacefully protesting. And we have that right as Americans to do that. As a faith leader, what we try to do is bring conciliation, that people across the aisles from every perspective of life have the right to speak, and they also have the right to be heard. We need leadership that's not going to be insightful in terms of inciting riots, but insightful in terms of going deeper and understanding the meaning of leadership for a nation that's indivisible, one nation under God with liberty and justice for all.
Imam Abdullah, if I could ask you, because of course Muslims have been sadly an early target of the president's during the campaign, discussions of keeping Muslims out of the country, ending Muslim immigration, the attacks on the father of a Gold Star father as well. And some of that animus has continued in the president's public comments since he entered the White House. How do you speak to your congregations in a way that, listen, I imagine it's easy to find anger and resentment and disappointment. How do you speak to them about a way forward?
Well, I've been looking at this and explaining that because Muslims come both from those who are domestic, or meaning they're raised here, natives, Black Americans more particularly, but then also those who have been immigrants, that the real issue here is that we have to accept the framework that this is terrorism, that this event that happened last week was that it was a form of terrorism, and that terrorism takes place all over the world. So we're having our American form of terrorism, but Muslims, no matter where they are, they're attacked by other forms of terrorism in their own places, their countries of origins, as well as here. And so it's important for them to understand that, but that's not the only thing is to show anger, as you said a moment ago, but that they have to understand that it's building coalitions with other religious groups and with other types of movements as the way that we move forward, so that we are in unity together to make certain that all of our human rights are being taken care of, and that the authorities themselves understand that to try to separate us is the wrong way to do things, and to make certain that we can work together so that we can all prosper here. So,
let me ask you this question.
I think part of the process.
Sorry, complete your thought. I don't want to interrupt you.
Okay. I just basically saying that the way that he was, the president was saying the things, that there were good people on both sides. Yes, that may be true to a certain extent, but the vast majority of the people, there were people who were opposing those who wanted to have a particular point of view. And so I think that he was misguided in making that statement.
Well, let me ask you this before, we don't have a lot of time, before we go, because when I talk to friends and family, there's a lot of curiosity out there about what can I do? What can an individual do to improve the discourse, just the state of emotion in this country? And I wonder if before Before I go, and I'll start with you, Rabbi, Reverend, Imam, one thing that you say to your congregations that they could do to improve the atmosphere, to make a difference, a small difference, but to make a difference. Rabbi, I'll begin with you.
Sure. I think the key is not to return hate for hate. Actually, return love and strength and justice. The opposite of hate is love. And we, as faith community, actually do that every day. Care for one another, to stand with faith leaders, like my colleagues on this segment, to stand loud and clear in the public square. And when there's an absence of moral clarity coming from the leader of this great country, we must be those voices, and we can. And every day we can be those forces for light. And I just would give the beautiful image in the Torah reading from yesterday from the Bible, Deuteronomy. There are two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. Mount Gerizim is covered with green, it's lush. Mount Ebal is desolate and barren. And the Bible says one is blessing, one is curse. Distinguish between the curse and the blessing, love and hate. That's what we do every day. And when we do it with more backbone, more love, we start to reshape the public square, and we do what God called us to do, which is to be agents of love and justice in a world that sometimes is darkened by hate, but the light will ultimately prevail.
Okay, we're short on time, but Reverend, I'll give you and then the Imam a quick thought for what folks at home can do to make a difference.
Very much so. We, as faith leaders, have to join together. As congregants, we must continue to walk together and work while it's still day and witness. Yesterday, I wrote a letter that was published in the HuffPost to Heather's mother, Susan, from Susan to Susan. I think we have to remember that a life was lost in the midst of all this, and to not just keep going, but to understand we have sympathy and empathy, and to be the void where our president isn't acting right, then we must be that voice and fill that void.
Imam, you get the final word.
Okay. Well, I think that the process is education, and the way that you get to educate people is to meet them halfway and find a way in which you can talk and find our similarities. And from there, we can re-educate them to understand that we are similar in so many ways, that our differences are really a blessing, so that we can see the full spectrum of what our human natures are.
Well, listen, we can only hope that voices like yours are elevated. I appreciate you all taking the time today, and let's hope folks out there were listening. I certainly was listening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Enjoy your weekend. More ahead in the newsroom just after this short break. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says he's not going anywhere. Mnuchin made the statement responding to an open letter from nearly 300 of his former classmates at Yale. Part of that letter said, quote, "We call upon you as our friend, our classmate, and as a fellow American to resign in protest of President Trump's support of Nazism and white supremacy. We know you are better than this, and we are counting on you to do the right thing." While Mnuchin says he will address those concerns, President Trump said he's ending his plans for an advisory council on infrastructure, tweeting out that he would rather disband 2 other business councils rather than pressure executives to stick around. At least 8 prominent CEOs have now stepped down after Trump blamed both sides for the violence in Charlottesville last weekend. We're back now with Stephen Moore. He's a CNN senior economics analyst and a former senior economic advisor to the Trump campaign. So Stephen, you know, the U.S. got its businessman as president. Donald Trump on the campaign repeatedly advertised, boasted about his ties with prominent businessmen. I'm going to get them on board, and they're abandoning him now.
So let me first address this issue about Yale and Steve Mnuchin. I mean, for people at Yale to be taking this kind of moral high ground when you've got a university that's essentially squelched free speech, and conservatives don't have a voice at Yale anymore. I mean, really, that's a little bit rich for people at Yale to be saying that.
I didn't ask you about free speech.
I know, but I wanted to get that off my chest. So, because this is related to this. These are the people saying, oh, anybody associated with Donald Trump should resign, so he shouldn't have anybody working for him, I guess. But on this issue,
I mean, as these CEOs resigned, they didn't say anybody working for Trump.
No.
They
well, I was talking about the Mnuchin issue. Okay.
But
now,
on the CEOs, they specifically referenced his Charlottesville
Yes, exactly. So let me say this. First of all, I was part of Trump's economic advisory council with a lot of these businessmen during the campaign. And these were people who actually were supporters of Trump. One of the problems I think Trump made, and I warned the White House of this, is that a lot of those people, if not most of the people on those business councils, especially the high-tech people, they were against Trump. They were for Hillary Clinton. They were not big fans of Trump. Some of them were never Trumpers. So I had warned that anytime there was any, opportunity to embarrass Trump, that they would do that and they would run for the high grass, and that's what they did. Is this harmful to Trump?
So you're saying that all these CEOs left to embarrass Trump?
I'm saying that they didn't stick with him at this first sign of trouble, and that's what I had anticipated would happen.
Could this be, is this the first sign of trouble? I mean, in their statements, they made heartfelt cases, and again, it's their position, it's not ours, but they have a right to a position. They made heartfelt statements about his comments on Charlottesville not reflecting American values.
Well, I think, look, these companies and these the CEOs have to reflect what's best for their companies, and they were under pressure from their boards of directors for customers, and so they probably, look, every man and woman on those councils made their own personal decision. I'm not going to judge them for that. I'm simply saying that, it's the other interesting thing is, if you look at these companies, my goodness, look at what has happened to the stocks. I mean, the stock market has been on this huge roll. He has done a lot for these companies, and I guess no good deed goes unpunished.
But let me ask you, what does this say about the president's ability to work with the business community? He was supposed to be the businessman in the White House.
Good question. I was hoping you'd ask that because, look, I having been on some of these economic councils, I can't tell you how many CEOs of companies have called me and said, I'll join. If these people are getting off, I'll join. So if I were Donald Trump, I'd say, look, put people who are loyal to you, who want to advance your economic agenda, have a new economic council, but of people like Harold Hamm, for example, the great president of Continental. I talked to him last week. He said, look, I want to represent Donald Trump. I still believe in his agenda. These people were put on the agenda to help Trump figure out how to create jobs and how to reduce impediments to growth. And, look, the economy is doing a lot better. This story keeps getting buried.
On that point, are you saying that the president then made a mistake to disband the councils, all of them entirely?
No, I think at this point he probably had to. I don't think he had any other, or else the pressure on those who remained probably would have been insuperable. He had to probably disband these things. What I'm saying is, Donald Trump, if you're listening, have a new economic council, put people who were with you during the campaign, some of the great, economic leaders of this country and business leaders, and get advice from them about how to steer this economy in the right direction.
So only CEOs, he should only work with CEOs who support him politically?
Look, I don't want to speak for them, but I know, for example, Fred Smith of FedEx. Now, I don't know what his attitude is about what Trump said about Charlottesville, but he has expressed a lot of optimism and a lot of support for what Trump wants to do for the economy with respect to tax cuts and deregulation. Now, Fred Smith is one of the great CEOs and entrepreneurs of the 20th century. So there's a guy who has a lot of stature, and I would like to see somebody like Fred Smith put on one of these.
Let me ask you this, as a final question. Is it possible that the mistake here was not made by the CEOs, but by the president in his comments about Charlottesville?
I think he did make a mistake in the way he made those comments. I don't think Donald Trump is a racist. I know he's not a racist. I've said this point many times. When I would go to the Trump rallies around the country to the campaign, Jim, you would be surprised how many blacks and Hispanics would show up there. Trump has to find a way to reach out to black Americans and tell them, I'm with you, I care about you, I want to combat racism. And one of the things, I wrote a column this week on this, black unemployment is down under Trump. He's creating 50% more jobs per month than Barack Obama did. But yes, he has to be much more sensitive to these concerns. And he didn't come off that way, and he dug himself into this hole.
Stephen Moore, thanks very much for taking the time this weekend. We'll have much more ahead in the newsroom. But first, meet this week's CNN hero. Michelle Allen couldn't stand the idea of terminally ill dogs dying alone in shelters. Hello, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jim Shea for Frederica Whitfield. President Trump hoping to turn the page after a turbulent week of backlash over his response to the Charlottesville violence. Much of that criticism coming this morning from inside his own party.
As we look to the future, it's going to be very difficult for this president to lead if, in fact, moral authority remains compromised.
Blaming one side or another when we're talking about the KKK or white supremacists, there is no comparison between hate groups and everybody else.
Those were just two Republicans you were hearing from. And now, as the president returns from his working vacation and prepares for a campaign-style rally on Tuesday in Phoenix, Arizona, a brand new poll shows that his approval numbers in 3 states that he won have now fallen below 40%. This as North Korea issues a new nuclear threat to the U.S. The rogue nation says that it is now ready to, quote, mercilessly strike as it accuses the, quote, reckless U.S. of driving the two countries to the brink of nuclear war. We'll have more on that in just a minute, but first, we begin in Bedminster, New Jersey, where the president is spending the final hours of that working vacation. CNN's Boris Sanchez nearby in Bridgewater. Boris, the president returning to the White House. He will not be there for long, though.
That's right, Jim. The president's 17-day working vacation to Bedminster, New Jersey wraps up today. He's heading back to Washington, D.C. tonight, but as you said, he is heading to Arizona this week. On Tuesday, he is going to take part in some kind of tour in Yuma. We don't have clarity on specifically what he will be touring, but we know that later that night, he is going to head to Phoenix for a rally. And the White House has been reeling, as you said, Jim, from the president's press conference last Tuesday that received harsh criticism from both sides of the aisle. Many in his own party are now urging the president to be more inclusive in his language, and specifically at this rally on Phoenix, some want to see him take a much more conciliatory tone. One of the president's critics, John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, was on State of the Union this morning with Jake Tapper. Listen to what he said.
The president is our president. We want him to be successful. People around him have to get to him, including his own family, to say, okay, you need to show leadership. You need to bring the country together. You're going to go to Phoenix and make a speech? Fine. That's your right. You can go there. He's got free speech just like the rest of us have it. But when you go, try to use that as an opportunity to say something that's going to bring people together.
Now, some have actually gone further than that, Jim, including the mayor of Phoenix. You know, over the past several days, there's been speculation that the president might use this rally as an occasion to pardon Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who's been heavily criticized across the country for racial profiling in the state of Arizona. The president himself said that it was something he was considering. Here's a statement from the mayor of Phoenix, Greg Stanton, who writes, quote, if President Trump is coming to Phoenix to announce a pardon for former Sheriff Joe Arpaio, then it will be clear that his true intent is to inflame emotions and further divide our nation. It is my hope that more sound judgment prevails and that he delays his visit. Jim, we've received no indication so far from the White House that the president has any intention of delaying this visit. No indication yet as to whether or not he may end up pardoning Sheriff Arpaio. Jim?
Boris Johnson says they're traveling with the president. President Trump faced his fair share of heat, as we've said this week, over his response to the Charlottesville violence. And as we said, it wasn't just Democrats, Republicans adding their voices to the chorus of criticism, too. This morning, several lawmakers said their word on the Sunday shows.
Where I want to look now is what are we going to do to deal with the fundamental issues that we have in the country, the issue of race, the issue of police and community coming together and developing policing methods that can unify.
You know, anyone that's committing violence ought to be condemned. Anyone. There's no justification for it whatsoever. And we can't allow the commander-in-chief to somehow equate the handful of people that would make those protests violent with any kind of sentiment that condones white supremacy or neo-Nazism.
Well, I think what he said on Monday was fantastic. It would have been even better had he said it on Saturday. What he said on Tuesday was just really challenging. What the president should do before he says something is to sit down and become better acquainted, have a personal connection to the painful history of racism and bigotry of this country.
It is not just fellow politicians who are disappointed in how the president is handling his job today. A new poll of Rust Belt states that helped push President Trump into the White House show that his approval numbers are dropping to new lows, and this is key, below the 40% mark. The new NBC News Marist poll surveyed voters in 3 states that Trump won in 2016, key states. In Michigan, 36% of adults approve of his job performance. In Pennsylvania, just 33%. Same in Wisconsin. Of course, you remember what a key role those states played in his election win. All of them surprises, really, taking them away from Hillary Clinton, the Democrat. Let's discuss this now with our panel. Julian Zelizer is a CNN political analyst. He's also a historian at Princeton University. Tanzina Vega is CNN's race and inequality reporter, and Andre Braugher is the former lieutenant governor of South Carolina, Trump supporter as well. Julian, I want to start with you as we look at these numbers. This poll, we should mention, was conducted after the violence, the unrest in Charlottesville. We're just 7 months into the president's term, and yet we're 3.5 years nearly from the next presidential election. How key are these approval numbers right now, today?
Well, they're important because Republicans are not looking at 2020. Politically, they're looking at 2018. And they're trying to figure out what impact might this have on the midterms. And some Republicans are also trying to figure out what impact do the statements from that press conference and other statements that he has made have on the reputation and image of the GOP more broadly. So I think the poll numbers are significant, even if they come very early in the presidency.
Andre Braugher, do you sense nervousness within Trump's team? Do you look at these numbers and see concern about 2018 as well as 2020?
Well, I don't know that you immediately see concern. You'd always rather have your poll numbers better than going in the opposite direction. But more than anything, what's important to me is when I supported Donald Trump, I wanted to see somebody come in and make substantial change. What he's got to do more than anything right now is he's got to make sure that he works with members of Congress. And so if they get down on him and he can't get his agenda passed, that's where the real problem lies. If he can get people back to work, if he can continue to make people's lives better, a lot of this other stuff will go away. But one of the strong suits in my 14 years in the General Assembly and Lieutenant Governor was I made big friends with certain groups. The Black Caucus was one of my best groups to work with when I needed things passed, and I would come off the podium and talk to them. He's got to have core groups of supporters, not just Republicans, that will work with him to get his agenda passed, and that's going to be key more than right now battleground states. But people like Kid Rock, who are ultimately thinking about making a Senate run, when they see these numbers go down, that may discourage him from running. So those are important in secondary aspects of what the president wants to try to get done.
Do you see the president doing the opposite of the advice that you just gave him there, Andre? You talk about reaching out. I mean, for one, he's attacking his own Republican colleagues, as you know, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, but also certainly not building bridges with, for instance, minority voters in terms of his handling of Charlottesville. Does that concern you in particular or most immediately for his agenda?
Donald Trump is a brilliant guy, and he does a lot of things that are not what we would all expect. He's had a good week and a bad week. But I would say this, in 2000, Donald Trump didn't do real well in the real estate market, but he learned substantially from that and the licks he took, and he talked about it. In 2008, when a lot of people are suffering, he was able to turn his business, what he had learned from failing times, and really capitalize on a bad market. And so I hope the bad times he had this past week, he'll learn from those and capitalize on an opportunity to unite this country, unite the two parties to try to work together on common things like a dialogue. I thought John Kasich was so good this morning, talking about making sure that the people that felt like they were downtrodden had a piece of the pie, that we work together for goodwill. And John Kasich did an excellent job this morning on conveying what I thought was a conservative message, but a message that all of us feel the hurt. All of us want to see people do better, and all of us want to make sure that nobody feels like that the Republican Party supports the KKK or these hate groups, because we don't.
Tanzina, I want to ask you, because Senator Tim Scott, in addition to Governor John Kasich, added his voice to the chorus of GOP criticism of President Trump's handling of Charlottesville. I want to play his sound again on State of the Union this morning. He had some very strong words, and get your reaction.
As we look to the future, it's going to be very difficult for this president to lead if, in fact, that moral authority remains compromised.
That's a Republican senator there, Tanzina, saying that the president's moral authority is compromised. How damaging is that for, I mean, particularly in the African-American community, but beyond that as well?
I think that you're seeing some really significant comments coming out of this past week, particularly from people in the GOP. You know, after the last election, not this past election, but the last election of President Obama, the GOP had to really do an analysis and came out actually with a report saying how much they needed to get better at connecting with and communicating with communities of color, women voters, et cetera, and marginalized communities. And I think what we've seen is they've gone the opposite way. They zigged instead of zagging. And so, and in addition to that, you're also seeing that the president himself is inconsistent on his messaging when it comes to this. You know, we get a late response, then we get what some people are saying is a decent response, and then we get, you know, the press conference on Tuesday. And so I think we have to take Americans' intelligence pretty seriously and understand that it's a little bit insulting to assume that, you know, we can just sort of pivot back and forth on issues that are so fundamental to American democracy and society. And racism is one of those issues.
People have memories, right? And emotional issues are the ones that tend to stick. Julian, I want to ask you this, though, because after the 2016 election, there was criticism of the Democratic Party, of the standard bearer Hillary Clinton, but also other candidates, the strategy and criticism from within the party for going too far, leaning too heavily on identity politics. Do you see a danger here of overemphasizing, if that's the right word, just purely from a politically strategic perspective? And you even heard Steve Bannon in one of his quote-unquote exit interviews this week saying that the Republicans would benefit, in his view, if the Democrats went entirely down that path. Do you see dangers there?
Maybe, but I don't think the Democrats want to listen to Stephen Bannon for advice. I think...
But it's not just, to be clear, it's not just Stephen Bannon who gave that criticism. After 2016, you heard that from Democrats as well.
Yeah, but I think what this week revealed is some of those issues that are often characterized or even dismissed as identity politics are often social rights politics. It's about racial equality, about gender equality. It's about the rights of immigrants, ideas that have been really at the core of democratic politics since the 1960s. And I'm not sure the right kind of move is for Democrats to abandon those or even to dismiss those. It's true they have to pay more attention to the economy. It's true they have to look at how many middle-class Americans feel insecure. But I think they are onto some values that have been pretty important. And this week revealed why, when the president moved in the wrong direction addressing what happened in.
Also, if I could jump in there for one second.
Please jump in. It'll be the final word because we're running short of time.
The phrase identity politics is often used to describe only when we're talking about communities of color and marginalized communities. This election cycle, this administration, and Stephen Bannon in particular have relied very heavily on white identity politics. And so we need to sort of examine what we're saying when we're talking about whose country we're taking back, and all of these other sort of euphemisms that were used throughout the campaign and beyond.
How about American identity politics? Maybe we could agree on that. Julian, Andre, Tanzina, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, a sharp new warning from North Korea, right as the U.S. prepares for military exercises in South Korea, just across the border. This comes as one former presidential candidate says it is time to take out the rogue nation's missile systems. Details right after this.
CNN Newsroom, brought to you by Kind Snacks. Ingredients you can see and pronounce. Give Kind a try.
People confuse nice and kind, but they're different. It's nice to remove artificial ingredients. Kind never had to. We choose real ingredients like almonds, peanuts, and...
Was this a PR move by James Murdoch? He's the CEO of 21st Century Fox. He's a son of Rupert Murdoch. He wrote a letter this week that said in part, "What we watched in Charlottesville and the reaction to it by the President of the United States concerns all of us as Americans and free people." Now, James Murdoch didn't stop there. He kept going. He said, "To further demonstrate our commitment, my wife Catherine and I are donating $1 million to the Anti-Defamation League. And I encourage you," he said to colleagues, "to give what you think is right as well." Now, James Murdoch said that his business, 21st Century Fox, has tried to contribute to a diverse and tolerant society. Some folks who think Fox News has an adverse effect on society cracked up at that sentence. What does James Murdoch mean when he's donating $1 million to the ADL? Does it tell us anything about Fox News? Back with me, Tanzina Vega and Nicole Hannah-Jones.
And rightly being hailed as such for pushing his fiancée out of the way as that car plowed into those counter-protesters in Charlottesville. The